Welcome to another episode of Not From Concentrate, a food podcast for busy brains. I'm Catherine Smart. I'm a writer, a recipe developer, and a food entrepreneur. And like so many creatives, I have ADHD. So I'm on a mission to help anyone with a busy brain spark creativity, calm the chaos, and tap into their unique superpowers to find joy in the kitchen.
This could happen to you. This could happen to you. This could happen to you.
Today, we're talking to Georgia Freedman, who's the author of the new cookbook, Snacking Dinners. Snacking Dinners is a beautiful and easy-to-use cookbook full of what she calls low-lift, high-reward recipes. You guys, I pre-ordered this book. I have cooked a few of the dishes, and they really deliver. I'm particularly into the tofu with chili crisp. Like so many people, I struggle with weeknight meals. But I'm not looking for some sad meal prep situation where I have to give up my Sunday, spend all day chopping, and then on Tuesday, my kids open up the fridge and it's not what any of us want to eat. I want food that is exciting, that's fun, and that's flexible. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Georgia is a food writer I have looked up to for a very long time, since she was working at Saveur. And I thought it was so interesting to see a serious food writer and recipe developer share her spin on the girl dinner trend. We're going to talk about the new book. We're going to talk about her approach to cooking and creativity and what she's learned working with chefs on their cookbooks as a collaborator. We're also going to talk about what it's like to be a generalist in the food world these days, which is something I really identify with, and maybe you do too, as a person with many interests. I think you're going to leave this conversation inspired by Georgia's many talents and ready to assemble and snack your way to a less stressful and more joyful dinner time. I wanted to take a moment to tell you about the Not From Concentrate newsletter on Substack. Subscribe for free to stay up to date on new episodes and get access to giveaways and bonus content. I also want to give a special shout out to my paid subscribers who get new, wildly delicious and distraction-proof recipes delivered to their inboxes every month, as well as essays and tips for cooking with a busy brain. Plus, paid subscribers get access to my full recipe archive. Head to catherinesmart.com to become a free or paid subscriber, and thank you for supporting the show. Georgia Freedman, thank you so much for coming. I'm so happy to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. This is so fun.
I am excited to talk about your new book, Snacking Dinners, but I feel like I first need to set the stage for when I met you, because I've shared this with you before, but it is just burned in my brain. We met, do you remember if it was 2018, 2019? Was it 2020?
Pre-COVID,
and we were at the IACP conference, which is the Association of International Culinary Professionals, a lot of food writers. And I had taken myself there by myself. I knew it was time for a career change. I just needed to do something. So I just got on an Amtrak and I wiggled my way into this group of people that was you and Matt Gross and Karen Shimizu. And I knew of you because of your work in Saveur, and I loved your writing. And you just like floated in with this like California girl, flowy floor-length skirt and your amazing hair. And you just had such a presence. And I was like, oh God, I just want to be her. It's just very full circle and funny that we ended up. I'm so happy I got to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, that is hysterical, because I always enter this spaces thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? I feel so out of place. I think that's just the way it goes, right? Anytime you enter a room full of tons and tons of people. But you met me with two of my good friends around, so that's always helpful.
You have a new cookbook called Snacking Dinners. And what I love about it so much and why I thought it was so appealing is I think of you, and you are, a very kind of serious food writer, recipe developer. And then you have this almost like a TikTok trend, almost like dipping a toe into girl dinner. And I was so excited to see this like really fun, accessible topic be taken on by somebody who I know really had the recipe writing chops. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you decided to take on this project and what it's been like for you.
Thank you. It definitely is different than the work that I've been doing, but it's not necessarily different from the way that I cook, because, it's not like I'm making a snacking dinner every single night, but it's, like all of us who work in food, you can be cooking all day, or in my case, I'm often writing all day because I do a lot of work that has a lot of text. But even if you are cooking all day, that doesn't mean there's dinner at the end of it. Like you can have 5 sauces at the end of a day of testing recipes that, you're still stuck with the same problem that everyone else has, which is, oh my God, what do we eat for dinner tonight? So this idea, it was one of those things that seemed really fast, but was actually something that happened over time. I started making little easy dinners when my daughter was a toddler, and she would, maybe, I guess she was still a toddler in preschool, and she'd get home from school and she'd have this spectacularly early bedtime, as they do at that age. And I had to get something on the plate for her. And I started making really easy dinners, just a scrambled egg and a tortilla with some, crudité or something. And often it would be just like cheese and crackers, or sardines on crackers with some vegetables around the side. And I looked at her meals and I thought, why am I not eating like this? Like, that looks delicious and so easy. Why do I have to make this big elaborate meal after? And then as she got older, we started doing this a little bit more often on nights when things just went wrong. Like sometimes there's too much homework, or you got stuck in traffic, or a meeting went late, and there's just not time to make the dinner that you planned for, or the kind of dinner that you would make if you had a lot of time. And sometimes you're just exhausted. So that's when these meals sort of took on a lot of life for us. And then it became trendy. And I was like, wait a minute, I've never been on trend in my life. I always like these like big elaborate ideas, but I have an idea that will work for right now. So that is how the book came about.
I heard in an interview that you did that you said this was cooking. What did you say? You said cooking towards the idea of what I want to eat. And you talked about that a little bit, but could you elaborate a little bit on what that means?
One of the things that I started doing, and again, I'm in the age where my life revolves around both work and kid. So it was when I started to have an evening to myself again. I could cook just for me. And that's really rare if you are, either just eating a meal with a partner every night, or if you have a big family around. Our schedules worked out such that I, once in a blue moon, have a night to myself. And I started to think, what do I want to eat that they don't like? And so it started that way. It started with this dish of fruit and burrata that's on the cover of the book and one of the early recipes. And it's just fresh fruit and burrata, and I put pesto and honey and a little bit of salt, and I put it on some crostini. And at the time, my daughter didn't like burrata. So that was just a way to give myself a chance to eat that thing that I wanted. But then I realized that that makes dinner more fun for everybody. That, we often cook around what kinds of foods the kid likes, or, the very easy stuff, the stuff that's going to be easy to get everybody to eat. But to make it a little more fun makes dinner a lot more fun. To the idea of making something into finger foods, it's not just the foods you want to eat, but also how you want to eat. And that is to make it easy and enjoyable. So you're actually doing the thing where you sit around the table and enjoy the people you're eating with, instead of feeling stressed about how late it is or how much work there was to get it on the table.
I want to talk a little bit about how we get to making snacking dinners because, obviously what we have in the fridge is going to dictate that. So I would love to hear, some of your sort of essentials, things you always keep on hand that we should be looking for in order to set ourselves up to make snacking dinners.
Yeah, absolutely. I broke the book down into a few different sections. One is sort of you have time to go to the market or to plan ahead and get some fresh ingredients. One has a make ahead component so you can plan your meals. But there's a chapter called Pantry Snacks, and these are the things that I make with ingredients that I always have around, and they're sort of the emergency meals for when things go wrong. And I think that's a real benefit. I like to have a pantry meal plan anyway for when, you open a package of stuff and it turns out that it went bad. But a pantry snacking meal is a really good lifesaver on a bad night when otherwise you would have to resort to getting takeout, which also takes way too much time. I don't know about you, where I live, takeout can take a whole hour anyway, even if we're going to go pick it up. I just always know that there is something I can put on the table in a pinch. So those things are generally canned beans, and I love soaking beans. I have some soaking in my kitchen right now for tonight. I have a whole bean club situation that I cannot quit, even though there's way too many beans.
Are you a Rancho Gordo woman?
Yes. And once I got off the wait list, you feel like you can't not be, like I would never get back on. So I just have too many beans now, which is a good problem to have and a good problem for my budget, actually. I always also have some canned beans in the house, because the fastest possible way to dinner is canned beans. We always have a handful of different kinds of cheese. My daughter loves cheddar. She loves goat cheese. We always have Parmesan. So those are always in the fridge, and they all last a fairly long time. We always have some kind of crackers sitting around. We always have tinned fish, either just tuna or, some other fun like Spanish stuff. Lots of olives, lots of pickles, lots of flavor boosters like chili crisps and things. And then I often have some like salami or something stashed in the back of the drawer in the fridge also, because that also lasts a long time. So the idea of the pantry snacks is that it's made up of things that I just always have around. Maybe you don't have all those same things around, but you have some subset of those things, or you have your own set of things that you always just refresh in your pantry every time you go to the market. And those are the recipes that you could turn to over and over again. I don't intend for everybody to be able to make every single snack in this book. I don't think that's the way people use cookbooks. But I think that if you look through that pantry chapter, a handful of things will jump out as things that you can make with what you already have.
For me, it's your cold tofu with the chili crisp and tomato is something that I have gone to so many times. I also know that you and I share a love of jammy eggs. And so before we dive into creativity and all of, your big career besides just this book, could you give just, a couple of your favorite ways to use a jammy egg?
I do a slightly firmer egg than the ones I saw your video on your jammy eggs, which is so much fun.
Mine was 7 minutes, and honestly, half of them were like more on the, like you said, like a ramen egg side. And I was like, I may have to add a minute to get more to the velvety texture.
Well, mine are definitely 8-minute eggs, but that means our refrigerators are probably the same temperature. I always tell people that you have to try a few out, because the key is you're taking it out of the refrigerator. You're not leaving a lot of time in between the time you take it out, so that you know the temperature of your fridge and you know the temperature of your egg, and then put it into already boiling water for 8 minutes. And then into an ice bath. And for me, 8 minutes gives that like velvety, almost totally set quality, but not in any way chalky, because I actually really dislike a firmly boiled egg. I don't like that chalky texture. Unless I'm going to like, if I'm going to mix it into a deviled egg or something, but like that's, I don't know. Yeah, it's not good. So that's how I like my eggs. In my mom's kitchen, that takes like 10 minutes. Her fridge is very cold. So you just have to test it out for yourself. And then I like to put toppings of various kinds on it. And it works great for a party, but it's also the kind of thing that everyone in my family can just decide what they want to put on it. I'm trying to find this photo for you here. The grid has all kinds of ideas, not necessarily recipes, just like different things you can put on it. But there's that.
Beautiful.
Some of it is really simple and just like some Aleppo pepper and a little bit of salt, which just adds a nice little pop, a little bit of za'atar. And then some are a little more elaborate. Like I did a green eggs and ham with a little bit of prosciutto and some pesto, because we often have leftover pesto from pasta in the house. I did one that is sort of a deconstructed deviled egg, where instead of mixing it all together, I just put little dollops of stuff on top, like a little bit of minced up pickle, little bit of mayo, little bit of mustard. I do one that I call Provençal, which is just some chopped up sun-dried tomatoes and some olives, and that just gives that nice little burst of slightly briny, slightly sweet. And then because I cook a lot of Chinese food in my house, I have a Sichuan version that has some chili crisp and a little bit of scallion and a teeny drop of Sichuan peppercorn oil, which is something that you didn't used to be able to get commercially. Like even in China, people would just make their own, but you definitely couldn't get any of that here. And then recently, a couple companies have started importing it, and it gives that numbing flavor that you get out of Sichuan food, the ma flavor. And it also has this lovely citrusy floral note to it, but you only need like a teeny tiny little bit. So it's just, that egg is like a little bite of going out for Sichuan food.
I'm so glad you shared that because I know you and I share a love of Chinese food. You are much more educated and experienced in the realm than I am, but I have so many friends that I've introduced Szechuan cooking to or Szechuan food to or other, really great regional Chinese food. But I think it can be really intimidating to take that on. And so I was curious if you had particular pantry staples, like the Szechuan oil that you suggest keeping on hand to kind of infuse your everyday foods with some of those flavors.
Yeah, no, well, and I have the benefit of some of my work is for a company that actually imports really high quality Sichuan ingredients. So ever since I started working for the Mala market, I've had access to wonderful, wonderful things, although anyone can buy their stuff. But yeah, even just like a Sichuan chili crisp. There are so many different kinds of chili crisp on the market now, but the Sichuan style ones have a little bit of that citrusy numbing quality. Not every recipe in this book is just mine. A handful of people also gifted me recipes and collaborated on recipes with me. And one of the ones that I make all the time is this rice noodle, although it doesn't have to be rice noodles, it could be any noodles, with sesame paste and chili crisp. It's a sweet and spicy chilled sesame noodles. And I worked on it with the team by Fly by Jing.
Oh, the best.
Yeah, and so it's sort of a take on one that they serve at their little restaurant in LA. And then we sort of worked on like the flavor combinations that most appealed to me and sort of the shape of things. But that one is a really good entryway into Chinese food because it's not a lot of ingredients. You get some soy sauce, you get a little bit of Chinese vinegar, which is really useful for a lot of things. You can just put it on your cucumbers after. The chili crisp and some Chinese sesame paste, which is it's roasty sesame paste rather than tahini, which is raw. And it has such a nice flavor. I added to a lot of stuff now. So that's a really good one if you want to like dip your toe into that Sichuan flavor profile.
Yum. Okay, and speaking of Chinese food, so in 2018, you had a very different book come out, South of the Clouds, which was Yunnan's, is it from the province of Yunnan, the food? And I think it was kind of the first of its kind, right? Sort of like translating those recipes for an American audience. I'd love to hear a little bit about what that experience was like. And that's honestly the kind of writing that I knew you from. And it's such so different. So I was thinking a lot about your creative process and how it must be so different when you're doing these like highly researched, enmeshing yourself in a culture sort of projects. And then this one where you're enmeshing yourself in your own culture, in your own kitchen. I would love to hear a little bit about how you approached this cookbook and how it was different or similar to some of your other work, like your previous cookbook.
Well, I realized after I sold the book, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the first book that is my recipes. I've developed recipes for websites and for other things and to go with magazine articles, but I had done 4 books and none of them were mine. I really love to immerse myself in other people's worlds. I learned so much from it. It's such a nice time to either hang out with a chef in the kitchen and just see how they do things. Or in the case of the China book, I lived there for a couple years and then we just went back over and over and over again for many years while I finished it up. And that process is much more about translation and helping other people tell their stories. Even Cooking South of the Clouds is technically just my book, but it's not at all. It's a book that is the recipes from dozens of people who were my teachers, who are my friends, and who I worked with over many years. And in those cases, I want to know what their stories are and how they want their stories told, and then I create something cohesive out of that. And I really love that. I think also the editor part of my brain really enjoys that because I've always found editing to be a very natural space for me. Snacking Dinners was completely different, and thankfully it was fun. It was, because it's a really fun topic, it was really fun to work on. And I think that's so rare to have a project that like, even when it's really hard and you're in the moment, like the crunch times, you're still like excited to go work on it. And it was such a blessing, in part because the topic was fun, but in part because the team I was working with was really fun. My publisher and editor at Hardy Grant is wonderful to work with. I really leaned on my agent in a way I've never done before in terms of like I usually come to a project with a very full picture of what I want, just soup to nuts. I know the whole thing. It's living in my head. And I have like forced myself to develop a ton of expertise. This book was much more build the plane while I fly it kind of situation. And it was just nice. And working with all the chefs who gave me recipes and friends who gave me recipes, it added that communal element, which I really enjoyed. But mostly I just went into the kitchen and thought, what do I want to eat today? Or what is an ingredient that I want to have that is not in here? Or what is a style of food that I want to have that is not in here? And because I wanted the book to represent lots of different people's snacking habits, it really helped me create a well-rounded idea and sort of helped me figure out what was missing from the book. I'd look at it and be like, oh, I don't have enough South America in here. I love that food. Let's think about what I can add. And that helped a lot.
Was it at all intimidating or vulnerable? I think perhaps you more so than me, but we have that journalist background. And, I feel very comfortable championing other people and their stories. But I'm curious what that was like for everybody to kind of look to you and be like, all right, Georgia, this is your story. This is your thing. What was that experience like?
It's definitely different and it's ongoing because I'm still doing lots of book events. Selling your own work is so much harder than selling other people's work. And it's, at least for me, it is. I'm so good at championing other work and work that I've helped someone make. And making my own, I think I couldn't have done this when I was younger. I think being in my mid-40s, particularly with everything that's gone on in the world the past years, I think there are things that I am not as stressed about as I used to be. And that has been a real blessing. I go and I give talks and people say, is it okay to ask you about? And I say, sure, whatever it is, we can talk about it. Because I think in many ways, like many women my age, my filters have come down a bit and it's a relief, actually.
Speaking of that, I did have something I noticed. So it's such a gorgeous book. The photography is so beautiful. The size of it is so beautiful. I did notice your face is nowhere here, even in the back. And I was curious about your choice to kind of keep, your words front and center and really have it be the food in your words, but to not have photos of yourself.
Yeah, I've never really wanted to do the cult of personality stuff. Like, that's not who I am. I became a writer and an editor to sit behind the screen. And now, of course, our industry is very different and we have to do all kinds of other things. But the reason that my face is nowhere in this book is that I really want this book to belong to the people who use it. I want each person to find the 3 to 5 recipes that really speak to them and to make those their own. If your eggs take longer, take a pen to the book and write that into the book. If this inspires an idea, write it in the margins. Like, this belongs to the people who buy it. And that was the point. I wanted this book to free people up a little bit from the constraints of the big dinner. You don't always need a protein and a starch and a couple of vegetables. Sometimes dinner can be easier than that, and you can fill all those ingredients in with your lunch, with breakfast the next day, and dinner can be the easiest meal of your day. But also, I wanted Leela's photos to really stand out. Leela Sid did the photos. She's been a friend of my sister's since middle school, and I love the way that she creates little worlds in all of her photos. And so I specifically asked if we could work with her. And then I hadn't met the book's designer before, but she did such a beautiful job also.
It's a gorgeous book. Okay, you said 2 things that don't really have to do with food, but they resonate with me and I think will with a lot of people listening. And one was that, as you're getting older, your filter is gone in many ways, or it's changed in your 40s. And you were also talking about how media has changed and your job has changed. And something that we've talked about briefly, you and I, at least online, is that we both kind of identify as generalists. And there's not, it feels like, at least to me, there's not a lot of room for that always, and just looking at your work, that feels very apparent. And, I think a lot of people, whatever their career is, whatever their focus is, are feeling that pressure to have that very strong personal brand, to have that, niche down, whatever you're doing to make yourself relevant. And I'm curious how you think about that and how you're navigating, with what looks like such success and grace, how you're navigating your career as a generalist in this super niche down moment.
I absolutely don't have a personal brand. I mean, I guess I have a work brand, which is that I turn things in on time and very clean. But that's how I like to work. And because I'm also an editor, I think that one of the things that used to exist in journalism that is less and less, unless you have, a lovely staff job somewhere that allows for this. But the great thing about this work is that you can go down a little rabbit hole for a while and learn really deeply about a subject you care about, and then figure out what the next thing is. A friend of mine once said it's a little bit like getting a master's degree. Like every time you do a book project or even a really deep dive magazine article, it is a little bit like going back to school just for that topic. And I love that. And it's what keeps me interested, 20 years in. I'm still really interested in this work because suddenly my work has become a lot about agriculture and the environment and all these other things that are related to food. Whereas earlier, it was very much about this part of the world that I was living in through the lens of food. You can do pretty much anything through the lens of food. But the juggle is very interesting. I have 2 separate newsletters because the topics are very, very different. And it's very hard to run 2 separate newsletters. One of them has gotten really short shrift while I'm marketing this book. We'll see. I feel like everything changes so frequently now that you just have to be very open to what that looks like and willing to shift. With this book in particular, I thought I will do all the things I've never done before. I will do it fast. I will try to do it easy. I will do it without becoming the world's top expert and developing a massive platform before I do it. I will reach out to brands to collaborate, which I'd never done because as a journalist, that's just no-go, but I don't do that work right now. So I can reach out to someone like Fly by Jing. And I knew Jing for years before this, but just that all of those pieces that I had never done, I thought, well, this is the book. I'm just going to try all these things. And it has worked well. I think it has worked well because my publisher is a genius and knows how to sell books and hire designers. The fact that the idea is really appropriate for now is great, but it's definitely a group project. And so a lot of the success of this book has also been the success of having a publisher who really believes in the idea.
Well, I'm certainly glad that you're taking those risks because something I think about a lot as I'm watching the media landscape change is that I hope that the experts and the editors stay with it and find a way to exist, because I think coming up in the newspaper world, there was a big part of me that was like, well, I can't, like none of this fits. Like you were even saying about reaching out to brands, these things that were just like, oh, you don't do that as a journalist. And I think that sort of training and integrity is so important. But I also would hate to see people with good ideas and good work ethic and people who have something to offer just totally jump ship. So I'm really happy that you're trying these new things and they're working so well, because you're exactly the kind of person that I want to see continue to, create and succeed.
Thank you.
You are working right now on a cookbook with Single Thread, the incredible restaurant, and it's more than a restaurant. And I'm curious about that project. I don't know how much you can say, but in general, I know that you work with a lot of chefs. You translate a lot of recipes and ideas and cultures. I'm curious how that affects your own creativity and how you think it affects the way you work in the kitchen and how you like to eat.
Oh, goodness. It always affects me. I don't know that, sometimes there's a one-to-one correlation to the way it affects me. I'm like, oh, this ingredient, I should be using this all the time. Or, oh, that's such a smart way to make that thing. I should be doing that. And so, there's certain recipes I've been testing from this book that are just for sauces or other things that now live forever in my kitchen. I will make them every time I run out because they're just so delicious. And then just watching the way that team works is really interesting, and watching other people's creativity is really interesting. Every project has been different. My very first book was a book with the Chocolate Room in Brooklyn. And the reason that book happened is that I wanted to know how they make their cake. And so I walked in and said, I've been coming here for years. I want to start writing cookbooks. Would you guys like to do something like this with me? And so I learned to bake because my mother makes a lot of beautiful pies, but she was never really a cake baker. Like I watched cakes fall apart in my childhood. And it was because she was just following the recipe in front of her. And there are so many things those recipes leave out that I got to add to my book. Things like refrigerating your cake layers and how that stabilizes things. So every book has taught me. I didn't go to culinary school. I learned by looking over people's shoulders. And that was true when I was in the magazine world, and it's true in all of these cookbooks. But mostly I'm just inspired by the way that people make their choices and watching their creativity. And I think that eventually that does filter into what I do, but in ways that I'm not always aware of. I don't really have an agenda with this book. I want everyone to use this book in the way that suits them. I mean, I have this chapter in the back that people often skip, I think, because it's at the very end. But it wasn't one that we had planned. It was one that sort of evolved, and it's splurgy snacks. The splurgy snacks chapter. It doesn't get as much attention as other things, but I love that chapter because my theory on the splurgy snacks is that sometimes you need to create a celebration at home, and that doesn't have to be hard either. I really like to throw a party or a small dinner party or a huge party. I just like to have people over and the community that can create. But sometimes you need to be able to do that on a small scale also. And so instead of trying to go out for Valentine's Day, which is the very worst night to go to a restaurant.
Don't do it.
No. Make yourself a little splurgy snack with a little bit of caviar instead. And the idea that if you buy a tiny amount of an expensive ingredient, it's not that expensive anymore because you're only feeding 1 or 2 people. You're not trying to feed 10 people.
I love that so much. And you don't need as much as you think you do.
No.
You know, I used to cater in my private chef days, and people would want these like massive cheese boards and all these big things, and you throw away so much. And I think people don't always appreciate that if you cut it up into little pieces and you add a pile of beautiful fruit or some really nice crackers, like you can stretch those pricey ingredients and still feel like really luxe. So I love that.
Yeah, no, there's an avocado. It's an unstuffed avocado and crab salads. Instead of putting the crab in it, I have crackers to put it on and picked crab meat. I generally do my own, particularly for the recipe testing, but picked crab meat can be very expensive if you're using a lot of it. If you're only feeding one person, if you're only making it for yourself, or you're making it for yourself and a friend for a birthday or for a partner for Valentine's, it's not nearly as expensive.
All right, avocado and crab leads me to my next question, which was, you are a California girl.
Yes.
How has that influenced your cooking, and how does that affect the way you approach feeding other people, making dinner for yourself, all of it?
Well, it was interesting because I lived away from California for 17 years, first New York and then a little bit in China. And I knew that there were things that I was missing out of my cooking when I didn't live in California. And when I came back, I really dove into this question of like, what is California cooking? And I have a newsletter about it and where I interview people about the way they cook at home. And the things that people talk about consistently in every single interview are access to fresh ingredients, mostly produce, but seafood also, and really high quality meats and things. We just have so much access here all year round. Out my window behind me is a Meyer lemon tree. And technically, citrus is winter. That tree gives fruit all year long, and so much of it that I pick enormous bags. I've been schlepping them up to single thread, huge bags of citrus. And I look at the tree and it's like I have picked nothing. It is still completely full of fruit. So like when I need to make a salad dressing, I'm just like, can someone grab me a lemon? You know, it's just such a different way of cooking. We have herbs that are fine all winter. Not all of the herbs, obviously. And cilantro is almost impossible to keep going. But there are herbs in my garden all year round. And you can do that in a window box if you live somewhere else. But it's just very different. And you really start to take it for granted in a certain way, and in a way that I actually really like, because it means that you're just cooking with fresh things all the time.
I'm so jealous. So my mom, one of my mom's best friends lives outside of San Francisco, and I'm from New Hampshire. She lives in New Hampshire, and every year her friend packs up Meyer lemons and sends them. And it is like the most precious thing. My mom plots out what she's going to make with them. It's like a big to-do when they arrive. So yeah, you're spoiled, Georgia.
We are very spoiled here. And it was funny to be away and come back to it, because like I was at my mom's and she's in Southern California, and I came back with tons and tons of gorgeous oranges. These are not oranges you can get in the market. I think they probably don't ship very well, or the skin is too thin and people don't like to peel a thin-skinned orange because the juice gets all over your hands, so they're not as commercially available. The flavor is so good. And then I was like, wait, can I take some avocados? And she just like thrust a bunch of avocados at me because she has a tree. It's magic to live in a place with this kind of environment for growing all year. And I really am glad that I have learned to appreciate it by not having it for a long time. The other thing that people say is that they eat what their neighbors eat. And in California, we're such a microcosm of the world. And there are other places like New York City, New Jersey, Chicago. There are other places where this is also true. But I feel like it's more true in California than probably anywhere else, just because it is such a huge place, and there are so many people who live here from all over the world. And California never had one moment where one immigrant group dominated after the Spanish. There wasn't one big push into, in the middle of the country, you get like a big Scandinavian influence, for instance, because that community moved in and established a food system. In California, as soon as the gold rush happened, tons of people came, and that migration pattern never stopped. It's always new. It's always new flavors. It's always new people. So the food of California is not one thing. It's, I always assumed that this food was Japanese because my Japanese, neighbor makes it, but it's not. It's something that she learned from a Korean friend. It's all these stories that you hear about learning to cook from other people. And those flavors really come in. And I think that really informed the Snacking Dinners book, in that there are a lot of, I want people to try a little gochujang. I want people to have some kimchi in their fridge. Because when you start to add those flavors, I'm not necessarily making elaborate Korean meals myself. I'll go out for that or to a friend's house. But those ingredients become part of your culinary vocabulary. And that is, really, I think, defining the way that people in California cook.
Such a beautiful thing when you start keeping a jar of kimchi. It's like, and chili crisp and, these different ingredients, preserved lemons. It's like your world kind of opens up.
Yeah.
And thankfully they all last for a really long time in the fridge. So you don't have to feel the pressure.
No, the gochujang lasts, I don't know, months and months and months.
So I also wanted to ask a little bit more about your Substack. So that's probably, I'm guessing, one of the best places for us to connect with your writing, other than, of course, buying Snacking Dinners and South of the Clouds. Can you tell us a little bit about your Substacks?
Yes. So the one that is getting the most attention right now, because it is related to the book, is also called Snacking Dinners, and it's just at snackingdinners.com, although it is through the Substack medium. It's just a weekly recipe, and a lot of them are my recipes, and some of them are recipes from upcoming cookbooks or from friends, but it's just usually on the weekend, occasionally on an off day, a recipe that is similar to what I have in the book, these sort of snacky, fun, easy to make, easy to eat ideas. Some of them are a little bit more elaborate than the ones in the book because I have a little more, I tried to keep everything in the book to 20 minutes maximum unless you're doing a prep ahead step. The newsletter has a little more flexibility in terms of the timing, but that's a really fun one, and it's a great place to connect, and also I'm starting to put technique videos up so that if you've never cooked with one of the ingredients in the book, but you are curious to try that recipe, you might find some tips on the newsletter or on the website, snackingdinners.com. And then I do have the California table, which is also on Substack. And that is really an excuse to just call people and talk to them about their cooking. It's really a fun project, but it's a lot of interviews and then recipes that people have given me. Sometimes it's my own work. I have some of my favorite recipes that go out there. But every month or two, I try to interview someone about how they cook in California, and then they give me a recipe. So the idea is sort of community cookbookish, that over time we're building this California community cookbook of many ways that people cook in the state. And that is sort of the only way that I know of capturing what it is to cook and eat in California.
This is making me want to get on an airplane and go visit my sister in LA and my brother and sister-in-law in Carmel, as much as I love Boston in this soupy summer. That all sounds wonderful. Okay, Georgia, I'm going to wrap up with what I call the busy brain section, and I will need you to please answer 2 questions. So one is, what is one thing you do to spark creativity in the kitchen? And the second one is, what do you do to calm chaos in the kitchen? Because sometimes things can feel a little out of control, a little messy. So if you could share what sparks your creativity and what calms your chaos, I think it would be very helpful.
I think about this with the way my husband cooks more than the way I cook, because that's what his brain does. But there are 2 things I do when I cannot figure out what to cook and the basics that I always make sound really boring. I have way too many cookbooks, and I don't necessarily cook from all of them, but I flip through all of them, and I will end up looking at something and thinking, oh, that flavor combination. Okay, let's do something like that, even if I can't make that whole dish. The other thing I do, particularly in summer and fall, is go to the market. I have Berkeley Bowl 5 minutes from me, and the biggest Berkeley Bowl, the Berkeley Bowl Extension West. And they have a produce section that is just mind-boggling. The first time people walk into this market, they don't even know what to do with themselves. You can get things from all over the world in pretty much any season. And then they also have a lot of seasonal things. So I'll walk in and I'll be like, oh, it's mushroom season. I didn't know. Let's do risotto. It's like going to the farmer's market and deciding that you're going to cook based on what is available at the farmer's market. But I happen to have it in a beautiful supermarket nearby. The chaos in my kitchen is generally being a mom and having people try to talk to me while I cook. And sometimes I am fine with that. And a lot of the time, what I actually need is quiet. So I will kick people out of my kitchen pretty vigorously.
It's called a boundary.
Yes. Yes. I just wish there were doors in my house to make it easier. I really like doing the calm, quiet work of like shelling peas or favas. And I'll put on a podcast or I'll watch some show that I don't care if I'm looking at the screen. And I will give myself, particularly if it's between work and dinner, it's very hard for me to shut my brain off. I have to do something to actively turn my brain off. And at night, that's often, streaming a show or reading a book. But while I'm cooking, I can also build in that, I'm going to chop a bunch of things and I'm going to have the radio on, or I'm going to have a show that I don't need to look at, and which is essentially like listening to a radio play, right? And that will help focus the day a little bit, because it will stop me from spinning on all the work stuff and going back to the desk and writing something down, over and over and over again.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Georgia. I've so enjoyed getting to chat with you. I'm going to see you in real life in New York soon. So that will be exciting for our friend Alexis's book party. But in the meantime, where can everybody find Snacking Dinners? I assume anywhere books are sold?
Pretty much. It's definitely available online, anywhere books are sold. Some of the big retailers have it in stock in physical stores and some don't. But also Cost Plus has it. It's all over the place. A lot of small stores have it. So if you just look for it or get it online, I really like bookshop.org, and you can order through your local indie that way.
Thank you again, Georgia. Thank you so much for being here. I cannot wait to go crack open the chili crisp and put on some tofu and make all of the recipes in this book. And you. I hope you leave this conversation looking at dinner in an easy, breezy, California magic hour kind of light. But before we go, I need to ask you for one thing that would mean so much to me in the show. Please go to my website, catherinesmart.com, to keep in touch, subscribe to my newsletter, and follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. And before you go, please take a moment to share this episode with a food-loving, busy-brained friend, or anyone you know who could use some help making mealtime a little bit easier and more enjoyable. All right, I'll see you next time.
This could